Hello, welcome to the Citrus Garden. If you're new here, my name is Christina. If you're not new here, welcome back. I know it's been a really long time. So today I'm doing a collective reading. I've been getting so much information the last couple of months, I want to say, about this sort of collective energy that I've been sort of picking up on, which is probably one of the reasons why I haven't been uploading as much in terms of the individual zodiac signs. I think just this energy is just so strong that I haven't been able to. Doesn't matter. I'm gonna do a collective reading. I've pulled cards, not that many, so I don't know how long this reading is gonna be, but I'm also going to be sharing some of the information that I've just been getting intuitively, like downloads, that kind of thing. So to start off, I feel like this reading is wanting to span across the last 4 years, let's say. The last 4 years was being described to me as sort of this big valley that the collective energy has been moving through. And some of that imagery is in the cards as well. This big valley. If you think about sort of masculine versus feminine, valley is obviously more of a feminine energy. So if you think about the last 4 years, it could be interpreted as being sort of like this forced, obviously collective tower moment, but in order for the feminine energy to have almost like a forced timeout or a break. And it's really interesting because the bottom of the deck we have here, I mixed two decks together. So we have the High Priestess, Page of Swords, High Priestess again, and the Queen of Cups. So a lot of feminine energy here at the bottom of the deck, but then all of the cards in the actual reading part, in the actual spread, are all masculine cards. So I feel like there's this really interesting sort of mirroring happening where, I don't know if anyone remembers this, but at the beginning of January 2020, there was the biggest news story in January 2020 was this sort of massive wildfire that was spreading across Australia. A lot of people that I talk to don't remember this happening, but for me it sticks out very clearly as almost like the marker. January 2020, the wildfires in Australia was this huge sort of marker on a collective timeline level. And interestingly, this past summer, there were huge wildfires happening all across Canada. So if you think about Canada and Australia, it's almost like the opposite sides of the world. So to me, that's kind of symbolizing almost that was the beginning of this collective grand valley or basin kind of energy. January 2020 until this past summer in the Northern Hemisphere of being this is the marker of when we're coming out of the valley. So this kind of energy of coming up out of the valley to me was kind of it's absolutely feeling like an uphill climb these last couple of months. For me personally, but I don't know, for I think the collective generally is kind of feeling this way where it's an uphill climb to get out of this valley. Because it's kind of it's shifting from this sort of feminine energy where the last 4 years were an opportunity, perhaps, if you want to phrase it like that, to evaluate or reevaluate or gain some sort of spiritual, let's call it, for lack of a better word, or feminine, or with the High Priestess, for me, the High Priestess talks about knowledge that you can only gain for yourself. It's not anything that anyone can teach you. It's something that is felt very intuitively and deeply for yourself. That's what the High Priestess is. And with the Page of Swords here, so I'm using two decks. One's more of a standard tarot deck, and then the other one's called the After Tarot, which is kind of, it's a take on the traditional tarot, but it's like the scene that happens right after the card. So if you compare these two high priestesses, even here there's this sort of like mirroring, right? It's like they're mirror images of one another, which is so interesting to me. And they're both surrounding this sort of page of swords, which to me always represents kind of like a gathering of information, a research gathering as well, could be something like that, or learning something. And I feel like with all the retrogrades happening as well, there's like so many planets in retrograde or going into retrograde at the moment, that it's like it's bringing all of these past lessons back, almost asking like, what have you learned, right? It's like there's of course school started today, right? Like in Canada at least, like people are back to school, but it's kind of like it's bringing up lessons from the last perhaps 4 years, just generally is kind of how I'm feeling it. That's what this reading is about. And I feel like the feminine energy here, especially with this Queen of Cups, this has been coming up a lot too. Like the Queen of Cups, which and the reason why it's coming out with all of this watery energy as well, if we go back to the valley, I was reading about it in this like symbology book. The valley represents, of course, like, I feel like most people think of it as being like a low point, right? Or like a difficult, like if you're journeying along the path, it's kind of like this lull, perhaps. But at the same time, the valley can represent sort of like the womb or abundance, or it's like where water collects, where water is stored or gathered. So it could be a representation of abundance, the abundance of water, which could be sort of like more spiritual energy, that kind of thing, or just emotional energy in general. So there's all of that. Sorry, there's just things about emotions being sort of a filter, or how you perceive things through your emotional filter is really important. Okay, anyway, so that's just the bottom of the deck. But we have here the movement card. This is the bottom of the deck for the Prism Oracle that I'm using. So movement, frustration, mystery, and caution, which like these three cards, it's like there is movement happening. Absolutely, there's movement happening. It's feeling like this collective, like, push up a hill in order to get out of this valley. And if you just like, one of the news items that's happening right now is this sort of mass exodus of a group of people leaving this valley, right? That's sort of the image that is, or like the physical representation of what's happening on a bigger scale, if that makes sense. There's been a lot of that happening for me recently, where I feel like there's kind of like this phenomena of like the physical manifestations, or very physical. It's wanting to specify sort of like quote unquote real world physical manifestations that are catching up to the sort of psychic realm, is kind of how it's feeling. Or there's like an alignment of psychic realm and physical realm kind of energies. Of course, physical realm energies are always going to be slower, and always a little bit, I don't want to say delayed, but it's like it's on a different frequency, right? Like the physical manifestations are slower, whereas spiritual or like thought-based, or however you want to phrase it, is a much higher vibration. So the frequency is much higher. But it feels like to me that like the peaks of the spiritual and the physical realms are starting to align, meaning it's becoming more amplified. Like a lot of physical events, let's call it that. I don't know what else to phrase that. Like a lot of events in the physical realm are starting to align with the spiritual frequency, even though the frequencies are slower, if that makes sense. I hope that's making sense. But there is movement, basically, is what this is feeling like. So that's just the overall context of what this reading is about. I'm going to go into like the actual cards. So the first one here, we have the Space card. The Space card, which I feel like is just talking about, there's very much not clear about the situation, because I feel like it's kind of, the way I'm seeing it as sort of like an energy reader is kind of like if you're going uphill, as I said, like going up into the valley, you can't quite see what's on the other side of the peak, if that makes sense. You can only just see up until the peak, or like up until the hill, right? You can't see past that yet. And what's so interesting here, you have the Fool card, which, again, this is from the After Tarot. So this is like, if you imagine the typical fool who's standing on the top of the cliff, about to take a step and they fall. But how I'm seeing this is sort of like the mirror image, where it's like this is the collective energy trying to pull itself up onto higher ground. That's what I'm seeing this card as, especially because there's all of this sort of like mirrored events, right? This is the mirror of the beginning of the journey. That started 4 years ago for the collective. This is sort of the mirrored event on the ending, if we want to call it that. So we're going to return to that point, trying to get up over this cliff. And there is a lot of support here. And it's kind of like, so I feel like there's been in this energy, the last couple of months I've been getting this a lot, where the masculine energy is sort of getting a boost up or an upgrade of some sort. So I'm not talking about a specific person, right? This is not like a twin flame divine masculine, your divine masculines come, like it could be, but it's more generally for the collective, that the masculine energy in the collective as a whole is getting a boost up, or like being helped up this challenge or this like uphill battle or whatever that is. And everybody, regardless of how you identify, has masculine energy within yourself. So that means that everybody in their sort of masculine representation or their masculine energy, or however you want to describe that, is getting this sort of boost up. That's how it's coming through. But it only works, it only sort of takes hold, or the boost up only happens if the High Priestess, if you are connected with your feminine energy. If you are not connected with your feminine energy, it's kind of just like things fall, right? If you're not paying attention, because the High Priestess talks to me about listening, like a very non-action, very much not speaking or not expressing necessarily. It's like holding the knowledge within yourself. That's very much this High Priestess energy, especially with the Page of Swords, right? Because this one is a very non-active energy, where it's like knowing some sort of truth without necessarily doing anything, if that makes sense. It's a very sort of passive listening kind of energy. That's what this High Priestess is. So the masculine energies are getting a boost up, but it's almost like it has to be in concert with the feminine aspects of self, if that makes sense. Because the next cards out here are the King of Cups, right? So you have the King of Cups, which mirrors the sort of Queen of Cups energy that came out at the bottom of the deck, right? So it's this sort of, I want to say like partnership within self about the water realm, right? Because there was an abundance of water in this valley that we've been in, an abundance of collective energies. It's very Neptunian. It's very much like, okay, I'm going to just leave that there. There's something here. There's like tons of energy from like Pluto coming in, because I know Pluto right now I think is in Capricorn retrograde, and I think January January 2024, this upcoming January, Pluto is going to go back to being in Aquarius. So I feel like that might be another important timeline marker, right? Going back to January of 2024. So once the 4 years has passed, a significant event might happen for the collective at that time. Especially, I don't know if that relates to any of this, but anyway, so the King of Cups is coming out next to the King of Wands, which I feel like is talking about the masculine energy that's getting an upgrade. So it's not Pentacles. It's not Pentacles related, although there may be Pentacles aspects, like, because the Pentacles is talking about like physical resources. It could be that. It could be related to that in a very indirect way, is what I want to say. But the areas in which masculine energies are getting an upgrade is the cups and the wands, right? The water and the fire, which is so interesting because I've been thinking about water and fire dynamics a lot recently, because it can be this sort of like, again with the waves, I was getting this earlier, the waves. If you have two waves that are the same frequency, right? But they're offset so that the peak and the valley collide, then you get this sort of like dampening out where they cancel each other out, right? But I feel like that's not what's happening, because what I was describing before is that the peaks are matching up with the peaks, which means that the waves are actually being amplified or doubled or whatever, just like they're increasing rather than canceling each other out. So I feel like that's what this is talking about. That the only way that this is going to be successful, or that, I want to phrase it like that, the upgrade is happening for those who have sort of mastered these two elements, the emotional, spiritual knowledge, or like being able to control how you feel about a certain situation, or how you express your emotions, or whatever it is, and your ability to take action, right? Those two things are extremely important. And again, with this sort of like filtering of like using your emotions as a perceptual filter, because it's something like, as an example, if you're feeling anxious, right, with your emotions, if you're feeling anxious and you take an action, most likely that action or that venture or that whatever it is that you just tried to do doesn't end up being successful because you were acting from a place of anxiety, right? Versus if you are somehow in control or have developed perhaps like methods or knowledge or awareness of self in a way that you know how to manage your emotions, or you know when you are feeling a certain way, not what not to do in that situation, or what to do. It's kind of like that, right? It's like the past 4 years were almost like a training ground for how to manage how you feel and how you act on that, and the dynamic between two. Because if, again, you have two waves, the emotional wave or the emotional frequency versus like the actual actions that you take, and if those two frequencies are misaligned, they cancel each other out. That's what this is talking about. I hope that makes sense. But if your emotional energy is aligned with the actions that you take, it becomes amplified, or becomes more successful, or it could even be negative, right? It could even be like more detrimental if the sort of if you're acting from a place of a low vibration, let's say, and you act in a low vibrational way, it amplifies the low vibration. I hope that makes sense. Anyways, so what's really interesting, that I feel like this is sort of like I don't want to say challenge, but it could be, especially because it's coming through as being sort of like the Fool of trying to get over this cliff. This is the challenge, or this is the what have you learned kind of moment from the universe or the planets or whatever. What have you learned about your own emotional and action taking kind of energy? Anyways, okay, the next set of cards out that we have here. So we have determination, which is this mountain energy, right? The peak. So we're coming out of the valley and approaching some sort of peak. That will take a lot of determination. I'm just going to leave that card there because there's what's again happening and really interesting here. You have the Emperor, the Sun, and the Hierophant. All very masculine energies, right? So, but I'm seeing this as kind of being like, especially when the Emperor and the Hierophant are coming out together like this with the Sun in between. So, and because they're from different decks as well, it's kind of, to me, representing this sort of like, these are like our institutional or societal or collective masculine energies as they were before the last 4 years, right? So this is how they were before 2020, let's say, or however this ends up resonating. That's just sort of my filter on how this energy is coming through. But this is how our institutions were before. Any sort of like government, institution, educational system, religion, whatever, all of that is included in these two energies. And then what's so interesting is this Sun energy. This is from the After Tarot again. So it's like the traditional Sun has the child on the white horse, right? But this one is kind of coming through. Oh my God, I just got this image of like that, like in the French Revolution, I think it was, where it's like pulling the flag down. That's really intense. Which I feel like has been sort of one focus in the last 4 years, right? Like, and I feel like this is going to continue to play out through this sort of Pluto in retrograde, or Pluto in Aquarius energy. So through to January 2024 and onwards, there's going to be a focus on this sort of pulling down or exposing areas within these sort of traditional, institutional kind of systems and what's wrong with them and what's not working. And what we've learned in the last 4 years of how this energy is imbalanced in some way, because you have the balance card coming out next. Because I'm also seeing this as being sort of like very strict rules versus sort of like this childlike play energy, right? There's a really interesting dynamic happening there where it's kind of like any sort of imbalance in terms of this sort of play versus very strict control is going to be set in motion in some way. I have no idea how. That's just sort of the general theme that's coming through here, especially with the balance. There was some other reader, I can't remember who said this or where I heard this, specifically talking about Libra energy, where it's like sometimes you need to be put off balance in order to find your balance again, right? So it could be something like that, where again, as a collective, we're going through this, but it's going to happen to each person as an individual, where it's like perhaps there will be this sort of very like going back and forth between like a really strict control energy versus a very playful and uncontrolled, or what's another word for that? Anti-establishment. I don't know. Maybe not that quite that extreme, but it's kind of like this a back and forth going between two extremes in order to find balance again. Perhaps over the next like couple of however long this energy lasts. And then the last two cards here, we have the Seven of Pentacles. This one again is from the After Tarot, which is so interesting the way the cards came out, because I mixed two decks together, but it's like every other card was from the After Tarot, right? It alternated. It went back and forth. Okay, so the Seven of Pentacles is talking to me about, like, what seeds have you harvested? Or, like, what seeds have you planted? Which ones have actually provided, or, I guess, provided fruit? Or which ones have actually become successful? And sort of taking that with you, because I feel like, especially in this dynamic here, right, with the Emperor Hierophant Sun sort of dynamic here, it's like there are things about these energies that are going to be left behind, that are going to be revealed to be no longer working for the direction that we're headed in, which is true of all things. That's a very Aquarius energy, to sort of like disrupt or innovate traditional methods of whatever, institutions, let's call it, just generally. Because this I'm seeing is a very Aquarius energy for some reason. It's playful, but it's also like rebellious a little bit. It's feeling a bit rebellious, right? Rebelling against some sort of institutional control. It sounds so extreme. Anyways, and then to end it off on that extreme note, we have the Tower, right? But this again is from the deck, the Golden Art Nouveau deck, meaning I feel like the Tower energy is actually happening for these two energies, the collective, like Emperor Hierophant. That's it, because like that's where the Tower is. It's not, but again, it's going to be felt on an individual level, just like it was the last 4 years. I'm not saying that's going to repeat. I have a feeling it's something different, but similar, but mirrored in some way. It's like the opposite or something like that, where it's like there's a Tower for this Emperor Hierophant energy that's going to, I don't know, shed light on some sort of imbalance in our collective lives. Again, this is all a very masculine energy focused reading, so I feel like it's to me, the Sun energy is talking about like our forward direction, our forward momentum, where we're headed, what we're doing, what we're creating, right? How we present to others as well, though that's kind of more of a rising energy. But anyways, it's all tied into that, whereas sort of this High Priestess Moon energy is more of our internal landscape, how we as an individual perceive our world that isn't necessarily shared to others, right? Whereas the Sun is very visible to other people. Anyways, so this Seven of Pentacles, I feel like, is going to be really interesting, where it's like there have been seeds planted, because to me it's actually talking about a harvest, which is not a typical Seven of Pentacles energy. That's more of an Eight of Pentacles. But this is talking to me about like harvesting the seeds that have been planted over the last 4 years. What have you learned? What are you taking with you? What are the institutional things that are no longer working on a collective level, but it's going to have a very personal impact on individuals? Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I'm not doing an extended for this one. Hopefully I can get back on track with regular reading soon. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for sharing your energy with me. If this resonated with you, please subscribe, like, leave a comment. Thank you so much for sharing your energy with me, and I hope you have a great night. Bye.